Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I want to make a couple of announcements. Let me back up here. I want to make a couple of announcements. First of all of you, when you checked in with us and got your badge, you also receive a little red ticket. Make sure you secure that ticket, because with that ticket, you may be able to win one of these raffle prizes that we have displayed just outside. In fact, during lunchtime, we're going to move that table up here just so you can see some of the things that have been donated from our exhibitors. So make sure you secure that raffle ticket, because after lunch, we are going to do the raffle. That's incentive for you to stick around with us till after lunch. Secondly, parking tickets. Some of you have been inquiring about parking. All of a sudden, you hear that hush. The parking vouchers will also be available for you to pick up right after lunch, immediately after lunch, about 1-ish or so. We're gonna have lunch in here at 12:30. Wolfgang Puck will be catering our lunch at 12:30. So about 1:15 or so, we'll have those parking vouchers delivered to us and ready. And you'll save $120 from parking. I may be 1 or 2 decimal points off on that. So once again, incentive for you to stick around with us. We have some extra seats up front. Please come join us up front. If you're standing in the back and finishing your conversation, please join us up front. And once again, we want to acknowledge your time with us. And we want to acknowledge our partners. So once again, this slide helps us remember the collaboration that we have with all of these partners that have helped us bring to you this great summit. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce you to John Gomez. For those of you who were with us last year, you will remember John, and he has come back to spend some more time with us. John Gomez flew in from New Jersey. That's where he lives now. He's the CEO at Sensato Cybersecurity Solutions. John is going to engage all of us in a highly interactive and dynamic session of cybersecurity defenses, strategy, and operations. John is going to lead a couple of teams through some table exercises of attacks and defenses in real time, so you can experience some real-world attack methods employed by Russian cyber attackers. He will challenge you to become more aware of your own assumptions and practices related to cyber and physical security. John and I were just chatting for a little bit. He's adding a couple of things to his comments, and we will make sure that we build in a little bit of Q&A time, because I know last year people enjoyed asking you some very specific things, drawing from your vast experience. So please, an Atlanta welcome to John Gomez.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Wow, that's not very Atlanta. I actually lived in Buckhead for a while, so anyway, let's just get into it, see where this leads us, and I want to start off with a little bit of a video, so if we can go ahead and play that.
Mirror, please defog.
Of course. Defog requires a password.
Yeah, it's Dave Shaves 851.
Incorrect.
It's not.
It is.
Dave Shaves 852. 853. 854. I know it's one of those. Come on!
You've attempted too many unsuccessful logins. Please wait 30 minutes before trying again. Brew function requires a password.
Give me a break. It's too early for this.
Password accepted. Preparing coffee. Toasting requires a password.
Sure. Give me a break. It's too early for this.
You may not use the same password for both appliances. Canceling all operations. Please reset your password.
No, wait.
Please create a new exit password before departing.
The password is Dave Gets Fired 99.
That password is 15 digits long. Please create a password with a minimum of 16 digits.
Dave Gets Fired for being late again. Please just open the door. 999, 999.
Are you sure you're going to remember that password?
Yes, I'm positive.
Please re-enter your password for confirmation.
Dave Gets Fired for being late again. Please just open the door. 99999.
Passwords do not match. Please reset your passwords. Please create a new password before accessing Fire Escape.
Come on!
The Partnership for a Secure Society reminds you to change your passwords every 45 days. Stay safe.
All right, so feel a little better now, a little more rejuvenated. So quick thing on that. on the changing password thing, it doesn't really matter if you change your password. I know some of you are like, what? That's sacrilegious. But it doesn't, because typically, if the attackers have gotten in, all you're doing is changing the password. They probably already have it, so they'll just repeat how they got in to begin with, so you really haven't solved much. Usually when I talk to large groups of chief information security officers, I'll take a survey. I'll say, how many of you at work require your employees to change passwords every 45 to 90 days? And pretty much everybody in the room raised their hand. And I'll say, well, how many of you actually change your banking password every 45 days at home? Nobody raises their hand. I'm like, well, why does it make sense for you at work, but not for your personal finances? Reality is, it's just a big myth. So my name's John Gomez. Just give you a little bit of background. Actually, like Mike Howard, I started off as a police officer, involved into a technical career. I was actually at Microsoft as well, never crossed paths with Mike. But good to see an alumni and see where they're going. Since then, I've worked for a variety of tech companies. In 2013, started a cybersecurity firm out of New Jersey. We focus mostly on critical infrastructure, healthcare, transportation, things of that nature. And so I don't want to really talk to you about that. I want to talk to you about, and the reason I showed you that video is kind of the convergence of cyber and physical. And I think that for, you know, even the title of this conference is the fact that these forums, these two entities are converging and at a very rapid pace. So we're going to spend a lot of time today kind of talking and examining what does that really mean to converge cyber and physical. And you'll hear it called cyber physical, which is kind of the term I prefer, but you're also going to hear it if in this space called cyber kinetics. And I think this has implications for those of you that are in organizations attempting to defend infrastructure, or those of you that are vendors looking to help your clients kind of grow. I think you're going to see this convergence become a bigger and bigger deal and become kind of what's accepted. So we're going to go through a bunch of different attacks, hopefully give you a chance to be in and see it from your perspective. So there's a variety of different things here. My suggestion to you is, do you think about what would happen if this were occurring in your organization? Would you detect it? Would you be able to respond? Would you even know what's going on? Because a lot of this right now is siloed. We've got the IT security team, and we've got the physical security teams. They don't really come together very often. In fact, we've found more often than not, when we work with these groups, that some of them have never even talked to each other. And yet, when you go through these attacks today, and when we take others through these attacks, it's pretty eye-opening to them that, hey, we didn't think of that. We just thought we had to be responsible for our domain. So first person I want you to introduce you to is Emily, who's just some character. It's not a real person. But she works in a high-rise, you could say here in Atlanta, on the 30th floor. And about 3,000 people work in this building, different companies. It's a shared occupancy facility. And Emily's company contracts a third party to manage their printers and networks, which is not atypical. It's something we see a lot of. And Emily's going to have a very bad day. So let's go through that bad day and see how it develops. So Emily gets in the office around 9. At 9:03, her boss screams at her that he needs a report printed. It's like a 70-page report. He's an old school kind of person, doesn't like using email or PDF files. So Emily has to go to one of the printers spread around the office and get this report printed. So she goes ahead, sends the report from her desktop to the printer, goes over, realizes it's not printing, and starts to hit a bunch of buttons. And nothing happens. Now, as Emily starts to walk away, she starts hearing some crackling and fizzing. And she turns just in time to see a big pop, which then begins to smolder, and eventually some flames start to break out of this printer. And since the printer's up against the wall and there's stacks and reams of paper around it, they eventually or quickly start to catch on fire. And then Emily and her office mates start to hear other printers in the office start to crackle and fizzle, and the same thing occurs, they burst into flames. So Emily decides to do the right thing, runs back to her desk, and on her desk is a phone. So she picks up the phone and calls 911. When she calls 911, she's actually routed to the receptionist for her office, who saw the flames and evacuated immediately. So the phone just now rings and she gets voicemail. It never goes to 911. Colleagues in the office attempt also to call 911 from their desk phones, and all of them go to the receptionist. What Emily doesn't know is that this printer issue has occurred throughout the building. Regardless of what company you're with, a lot of them use this third party And so all the printers are now starting to crackle and fizz and eventually become flamed. So Emily decides to run outside and try to get to the lobby and see if she can call from her cell phone because she doesn't have good reception from where she is. As she gets outside, she notices that people are attempting to either use the elevators and get into them, and they're having issues with trying to get out some of the other doors. And the reason for that is the building is a new building, and it just installed this cool, finely tuned fire control panel that's also internet enabled. And so this has been taken offline. Now, in this scenario, we kind of want to know, well, what happened and how real this is. Now, this is a fictitious scenario. It hasn't actually occurred yet, but it could. It's very easy to do. The phones on the desk, and the phones most of you use, are probably voice over IP phone. They're the standard phones that we now see deployed in environments. And to actually take control of those phones and reroute the phones is not that hard to do. In some cases, it's very simple. In some cases, it requires a little bit of wizardry. In terms of getting to the printers and making them fizzle, when I've talked to people like this, people say, oh, well, you know, it'd take a lot to get a printer to burst in flames. And that's probably true. But how many of you own Samsung phones? How many of you remember the batteries exploding? So let me ask you this. Was that a defect in the battery or a defect in the programming in the phone? It was a defect in the programming of the phone. Within days, and this is true, of that becoming public, that the phones were actually bursting into flames, there were a variety of people, both on the good side and the bad side of the world, that actually looked into, is there a way for us to actually make the phone explode on demand? Now, why would you do that? Well, if you're on the good side of the world and you have a terrorist who's about to do something and you could actually target their phone and have it burst into flames while they're holding it up against their head, it's a pretty good attack. And if you're on the bad side of the world, well, obviously taking people out through their phone would be a pretty good tactic for a terrorist. So actually taking a computer device and getting it to flame is not something that's beyond the realm of possibility. And there's some other things here, like getting into the fire control panel and getting past all of that. The point is, this is the convergence of cyber and physical. It's when we take the cyber asset, phones, printers, smartphones, whatever we have, access control systems, perimeter protection, and we use the cyber element to create a physical attack. And so that's becoming a much more real problem, and that's why we see this kind of convergence happening. So I want to really spend some time today with you just kind of examining that and taking you some other scenarios. But I think what's really important is that as you sit there, to get the most value out of this is do one of two things. If you get questions in your mind as we're doing this, please write them down. I'm happy to take questions at the end. But more importantly, think about, again, how does this apply to you? How would this play out in your scenario, in your world, whether you're on the vendor side or the defender side? So what I want to do is, before we get into any other scenarios, is talk a little bit about understanding who our adversary is. I talked a little bit about this last year, but some things have changed, so if you haven't seen this, this will be good for you. If you have seen it, I've added some new intelligence to this. But before we get into that, I want to talk about another company I own, because I think it's relevant, especially for this audience. So I own another company called Group Espada. We train law enforcement on special tactics, and we train special operations teams, typically Tier 1 and Tier 2 special ops teams for the military. Now, the reason I bring that up is because something interesting that plays into this, which also is actually fundamental for you in terms of defending cyber-physical situations. So we have a program called TAC 360, which is a tactical training program. And we had a lot of people that come to us, and really, at the end of the day, they're asking us, can you help us be more effective in executing tactical situations or engaging in tactical situations? Now, I want to share with you some statistics before I tell you how we do that. This number here, 3.4%, probably doesn't mean much to you, but it should if you're in law enforcement or you carry a weapon of any kind. And this number here, 19.4%, again, probably doesn't mean much to you right now, but it really should if you're either in law enforcement or carry a weapon. Here's the deal. Those two numbers are part of the outcome of a training scenario that was held by the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. They took a bunch of officers, some were seasoned, some were new, some were tactical officers, some were firearms instructors, and they put them through highly, highly realistic scenarios. Really realistic, beyond what most people do on their typical training. And the feedback and what we found was really kind of eye-opening. And what it is that Only 3.4% of officers demonstrated 70% accuracy when they're engaged in a gunfight. So that's that number, 3.4%. So if you have 100 officers that go through the training, about 4 of them will be at a 70% effective rate. And that includes probably some of you in this room. Of those that were effective, only 19.4% were actually able to hit a target that was 9 feet away. Right? So we're not talking distance. We're talking up close and personal, highly volatile, highly violent situation. So as a training company, as a tactical training company, we looked at that and we said, well, what can we change? We have people coming to us that kind of already know how to shoot, right? They've been through basic shooting, they've been through advanced shooting. When we're talking about tier 1 teams, like tier 1 special ops teams, these guys are shooting 1,500 rounds a day, but they're coming to us and saying, make us better. So we use something called neuro-linguistic programming, which is really just psychology at its most foundational method. And our goal is to get people to shoot 100% accurate under any circumstance all the time. The only thing we change when we bring somebody in from day 1 to day 3 of that program is their psychology. We never ever say to somebody, well, you got to distribute your weight differently than what you were taught. You got to maintain front sight focus. The only physical thing we ever address is grip on a weapon. But everything else we do when somebody comes to train for us is psychology. Now, the reason I'm telling you this, and it has bearing on what we're doing today, is that about 90% of cybersecurity, whether it's physical or even physical security, is your psychology. We found a few years ago this thing called rational response theory, which is that most of us rationalize what we don't understand or fear. And that leads to the first chink in the armor when we're thinking of any kind of security. As an attacker, which is one of the things we do, and I do, I actually bet on your rationalization. I bet that you will click a link. I bet that you won't. Here, let me take it. What's the most effective way to get past physical security? Any ideas? What's that? Tailgating? Yeah. But there's one that's even, it's kind of like tailgating, but it's more effective. Especially works well when it's raining out. Go to any employee entrance and have one of your operatives sit in a wheelchair in the rain with no raincoat, a duffel bag, and some books. And employees will say, can I help you? And all you got to say is, yeah, I'm here, I'm a consultant, I'm supposed to meet Mr. Kavanaugh. If it's a big enough organization, nobody knows who Mr. Kavanaugh is because you made it up. But 99% of the time, somebody will say, well, let me get you out of the range, let me bring you inside, and you can hang out here and wait for Mr. Kavanaugh. 2 minutes after they're brought in, they can get up, and walk freely through the building. Now, why does that work? Psychology. It's not fancy. I don't need to have a master's in security or anything. I don't have to be a sophisticated criminal. I just know that psychologically, if I put somebody in a wheelchair and they're wet and they're cold, people are going to help, which is great, unless you're trying to protect a facility. And that exact scenario is played out in some rather secure facilities that we've gone after. So it's rational response. You need to really think about if you're minimizing the possibilities, if you're not respecting the attacker and really thinking about how audacious an attacker can be. So that brings me to this person. For most of us, when we think of cyber and the types of attackers, we think of somebody like this. Some dude that's probably sitting in his basement, drinks too much Jolt soda, eats too much chili, doesn't have a life, and has spent way too much time on Match.com not getting any replies. All right? Unfortunately, this is the person that we defended against 15 years ago. This is not the greatest threat we have today. Life has changed. Same on the physical world. On the physical side, we probably have a socio kind of picture of who we think attacks us, but that's changed as well. But in the cyber world, it's extremely different. So some people are more up to it, understand the threat intelligence we have and kind of who the adversary is in, and say, well, who do you think is attacking us? And they'll say, well, it's Eastern Europeans, or it's Czechoslovakia, or Prague, or Russia. And that's all true, but I'll say, well, who is it? Like, who is the enemy? What do they look like? And they'll describe something like this. Bunch of kids sitting in like a leaky dungeon with water pipes that leak and mold growing on the wall and way too loud punk rock music. And they all, for some reason, they have these weird accents and they wear hoodies. Right? That's the modern version of the attacker. And that was true for up to about 2 years ago. They're very sophisticated. They're much more dangerous than the hacker I showed you. But life has dramatically changed even since I talked to this group last year. The people that are attacking you and coming after you now are these dudes, or dudettes. And the reason these people are much more dangerous is because the way that they're recruiting these people, these criminals, cybercrime, cyber terrorism, mostly cyber criminal or nation states, are recruiting these people is they're going to campuses in the UK, in France, some of the best universities that Europe has to offer, and they're actually going on recruiting missions, doing career days. And they're very open about it. Hey, we're a cyber criminal organization. Would you like a job? What's really interesting is parents are encouraging their kids to go work for these people. Why? Because they get amazing salaries, salaries that match any other organization, any legitimate organization. They actually get full benefits from day one. They get paid vacations, and they get incentives. What are the incentives? The incentives is if I come to you and I say, hey, I need you to go break into the Atlanta Police Department. First person that breaks in gets a BMW 7 Series. That's the incentive. We've seen cars, we've seen trips to Bali rather, we've seen trips to Fiji as incentives. So you get your full salary, full benefits, paid time off, and then if you're really good at this, you're gonna get free trips and cars. And that's really a cool place to work. You get free lunches, you get all kinds of stuff. Now the reason parents are doing that, because parents know that if their kids go to work for these guys for 2 years, that they will have an amazing opportunity to go build their career in it they want. This is the forefront of cyber. These are the cyber attackers. These guys are doing things that no one else is imagining because we rationalize, because we don't give them enough respect. The other thing is this changes the battle space. Right, we have a situation now where people with bachelor's, master's, and PhDs in computer science and mathematics are going to work for cyber criminal organizations. So if you think that we've seen the worst of it, if you think ransomware attacks are bad, wait till you start seeing polymorphic ransomware attacks. Those are ransomware attacks that change on the fly, right? So life has changed, your adversary's changed, and that is also leading to a much more greater threat on the physical side. And that's what we're gonna kind of go through in terms of scenarios. So the big thing here is the operational sophistication has evolved. We've gotten much, much more sophisticated, and if I had more time, I would go deeper into the technology, but that also may put some of you to sleep, some of you may get excited. So to balance this whole equation, we'll focus on some of the cooler, higher level stuff. But there's 3 basic groups that we categorize people into. We don't use the word hacker anymore. If you're using hacker, you're probably gonna get yourself into trouble, and somebody's gonna attack you. I've never met any criminal where, when I was a cop, and I said, so what'd you do? What'd they bring you in for? And they never ever said to me, well, I hacked some old lady walking down the street. I guess unless they were thinking of stabbing, but otherwise, no. Like if they were just mugging them, they'd say I attacked someone. You're getting attacked now. That's who the adversary is. It's gotten much more sophisticated. These 3 groups, cyber criminals, typically after profits, they're mostly what we have to deal with. Cyber spies are backed by nation states, and then cyber terrorism, which we haven't seen too much of. Right? We mostly see nation state sponsored stuff and cyber criminals. So let's talk a little bit more then, if that's the adversary, and we have to be careful of our own psychology because changing our psychology improves our ability to respond and to defend ourselves. Let's talk a little bit about, well, what are the actual scenarios that we can go up against and what we can see. So I think we all know this, and Mike covered some of this in his presentation, is that what we're talking about here is the convergence, right, of not just physical and cyber, but also people, right? We have to be able to figure out how do our people play into this equation, because ultimately they're the weakest link. So I want to take you through an attack we did. This is a cyber physical attack. And so this was done at a hospital. And I give this hospital a lot of credit because most organizations are not mature enough yet to really think about, well, how does this all come together? What if somebody came after us from a physical perspective and a cyber perspective, or vice versa at the same time? And so this hospital said, yeah, let's see what you guys can do. Now, I will say they had a pretty good security team, physical security, and a really good IT security team. So we decided, all right, well, we'll start with a physical attack. And for those that don't know, this is a CAT scanner. And what we decided to do was, well, let's target the CAT scanner. Let's see if we can get to the CAT scanner and do something that would either put patients' lives at risk or caregivers' lives at risk. So either we're gonna mess with the ability for this thing to properly diagnose and create images, right? False positives in the images, so you don't see the tumor, you don't see the, whatever it may be, the swelling or the trauma, or we're gonna do something that hurts everybody around the device. So first thing we did is we did get to the room, and we saw this thing. We didn't know what it was. So just to let you know, so we got past the physical security teams. We went there after hours because we knew we couldn't have any technicians around. The door to the actual CAT scanner had no access control, so we were able to get bypass that. And furthermore, before we did any of that, we went to the physician's lounge. We were able to get in there because there was no access control, because who else would go in there but physicians, so why do you need to swipe a card? And we basically borrowed, I guess you could say, some lab jackets or physician white coats or whatever they're called, and we were able to walk around kind of unimpeded. Now, mind you, we were there like, I think it was like 1:30 in the morning, so probably we should have been challenged, but we didn't get challenged. So we got to the CAT scan room. We found this thing. No idea what it does, but we were able to find the manual for it. So we were able to start figuring out, like, well, what does this do and how can we mess with it? Because that's what we do, attack things. But this made it real easy because they left the manual for us on what it does. We then decided, well, what else can we do? So apparently they didn't log out of their systems, so we were able to get to their computers, and we were also able to get to their wiring closet for the CAT scanner. Now, this gave us multiple opportunities to inject things that could mess with the operation and the diagnostic capability of this CAT scanner. So this is kind of that convergence, right, where we're physically there, and now we're going to implement a cyber attack. But this thing is kind of interesting. So this, I don't know if you can all read it, is a helium compressor unit. And it also has a cryo cooler, which was kind of cool, and we didn't know what a cryo cooler was. We Googled it on the spot. Thankfully, their computer allowed us internet access, but we also had our phones. So we realized that this thing can actually be exploded. It's a highly volatile issue, not to mention the fact that, you know, it's highly flammable. So we had the second element of our attack at that point, which was we could decide to either mess with the patients, or we could just explode this thing and hurt people around it, which would be a pretty cool kind of attack. Now, we also were able to get things like the model numbers and get really specific, right, and figure out how to actually attack this specific unit in the way that's the most damaging. They left out all the manuals for the unit itself. We actually used those manuals, and we're able to log into the system and start figuring out how the system is configured, what it has. Now, this helps us because it allows us to then figure out, does this software have any vulnerabilities that we can exploit, right? So we now have this. Now, we didn't have to breach a network. We just had to get into the physical organization. And you can see there's more data here in terms of what we were able to get. We were also actually able to get to the actual configuration module and start changing. Now, we didn't do that because this is a production CAT scan, and we didn't really want to go through with the attack, but there was nothing that would have stopped us from going forward. Now, think about this. We were from the outside of the world. We weren't part of the hospital. We were able to get there. Now, you can apply this scenario to a lot of different things. And I know some of you are thinking, well, not in my world. And I hope that's what you're thinking. I hope you're thinking, well, if somebody was that audacious, we could stop them, right? And if somebody came at us with, we've now seen attacks that are cyber-physical coordinated, where you have a cyber command location and you have a physical team, and both execute in parallel. So the cyber team takes out things like CCTVs, access control, fire control panels, perimeter defense, and those type of situations, right? And then once the path is clear, the physical team enters and then carries out the physical attack. And it could be a variety of different things. So what I'm trying to get you to really think in your head and play out in your head is, so what if somebody tried to do these things to you? Is there something, and we call these high-value targets when working with someone. What is the high-value target in your organization? What is your last line of defense? So we do a lot around perimeter and access control and monitoring, but are there things in your organization that if somebody got to and repurposed them could create serious collateral damage, right? And in this hospital situation, that's their CAT scanner. Now, shortly after we did this, we explained that to them, and they did put access control in place. They did clean up the desktops. They got rid of the manuals. They did all the right things. So working through these simulations and these kind of approaches, for some of you may go, that would never happen. So then figure out what would happen, what could go wrong. Don't rationalize. Don't let your own psychology kind of work against you. Because again, it's what we're counting on. So this is a cool story. We didn't have anything to do with this, but this is an adverse reaction, but it's still cyber-physical. This happened a few years ago. So there was this guy, and this happened where I live at Newark Airport. There was this guy that was a delivery dude from Maryland to Boston. And like every couple of weeks, on different days and times, he would have to drive some kind of packages. And it was all legit. He wasn't like a drug dealer or anything. He was just driving packages. But he would get tired halfway through the trip, and he would stop off at Newark Airport or Elizabeth Seaport, which is connected to Newark Airport, and take a nap or try to pick up a side job or whatever. And his boss eventually put a GPS tracker in the vehicle so that he could do fleet management. Well, the drivers all knew. They were told that this was happening. It wasn't a secret. And this guy decided, well, you know, I'm gonna jam this, right? And so he would go and he would park and he would turn on his jammer. So now the fleet management system looked like it failed. All of a sudden there was this like gap in the tracking. Now the problem with that is that little device that looks like a little dunce cap on the end, these are around the airport. And what they do is the last like quarter mile that a plane is landing, they switch over to these devices, and it helps them maintain center line and their glide slope. The problem is that they use GPS in order to do what they do. Now, whether you guys know this or not, GPS is not a secure technology. When we envisioned it and developed it, there was no security. So it's not a big deal to hack it, but more importantly, it's not really hard to jam them. So this guy jammed not only the GPS tracker in his car, but also these devices. So 2 to 3 years ago, if you were ever trying to fly out of Hartsfield and you were told there's a delay at Newark and you look outside and the weather's great and you check your smartphone and the weather's great at Newark and you're being told, well, there's a weather delay or there's traffic issues at Newark, it was probably this, right? Where they had to stop aircraft from landing because they lost that kind of glide slope and it creates all kinds of backups in their traffic. They could still land, but it does make it a very serious situation because if the if the device gets blocked just as these guys are coming in, they have to switch from an automated landing to a manual landing. And they're trained for that and prepared, but it is a big deal. And this took like months and months and months to find this guy because he never showed up at the same time, he never the same day, and nobody knew what was really going on. For a few months, they thought the devices were defective. Nobody thought that, hey, this guy had a GPS jammer, and when he was trying to just get away with a nap in his car, he was actually jamming the airport. Now, he would park, just to give you well, I'll tell you that in a moment. So you may say, well, hey, man, how hard is that to do? Wait, hold on, I don't have that. Oh, wait, let me, before I get to this other story, let me tell you about this thing. So some of you may be thinking, well, Howard, that must be a really smart, sophisticated guy to get a GPS jammer. No, it's about 199 bucks. You can search for it on Google, just say GPS jammer. They're legal to purchase, illegal to use. So you can get them out of the United Kingdom, all right? And they will ship them to you within 24 hours from the UK. There's actually a place, I think, called gpsjammerstore.com, and they have all kinds of jammers. Not just GPS jammers, but radio frequency jammers, Wi-Fi jammers. So if you want to take out cameras and they're operating over Wi-Fi, hardwired is the way to go because knocking down Wi-Fi is not that hard. Here's the thing, $199, he was parked a quarter mile away from the airport in a very highly populated area. So he took down every GPS within a quarter mile of his vehicle for $199. So that is the convergence of cyber and physical. So if you have things in your organization, you may have things in your organization you don't even know use GPS. Many of the computer systems we see today are to synchronize their time, use GPS. So if you block the GPS and you have something that's time dependent, it will be affected. So let's take this. Now this is something that we did do. We did a presentation much like this, talked about cyber physical, and we had some 3-letter agency come to us and say, well, so if you guys think you're all big and bad, what could you do in an airport? Now this is after they hardened the airport. They did this hardening exercise. I won't tell you which airport it is. We're going to pretend it's Newark. It's not Newark. And so we're going to go back to Newark, and I'm going to take you guys on a journey. I want you to experience this for yourself. Let's say we're all at Newark Airport. We check in, right? We go to the gates. We get through the amazing TSA processing stuff, which actually at Newark is pretty good now, at least Terminal B. And then you go grab yourself a snack in one of the new kind of restaurants they have there, which you haven't seen is actually also kind of cool. So we're all feeling pretty good about ourselves. We got in our snack, we got through security, and we head to our gate. And we're just hanging out at gate. I don't know which gate this is, but we're hanging out at this gate, and as you would expect, there's a dashboard telling you what's going on with the flight. So are you all with me on this so far? You're feeling it, you're uncomfortable in your seat, probably ate something you shouldn't, like a big fat boy burger or something, whatever it is you eat. Everybody good? All right, so you're staring at that screen, right? You're like, oh, thank God the flight's on time, blah, 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 blah. And then you see this. Okay. And then this. And then that. Now, this hasn't said anything that they've attacked your plane. All they said is, we've applied our skills. Okay, by show of hands, whatever you're feeling in your gut right now, how many want to get on the flight with me? Am I seriously not one of you? I mean, this is just a farce. Just some dudes playing around, just a hacker. This would devastate an airline. I think it's something like $135 per minute is what it costs them every time an aircraft is on the ground. At this point, I can guarantee you that not only this gate, but pretty much as this spreads on social media, flights are down for the day. Now, when that three-letter agency asked us to do this, they were like, well, you know, that first response was, well, that's not really fair. We thought you were going to attack the aircraft. And we said, well, we did, because that aircraft ain't going anywhere, right? I don't need to go do anything really crazy sophisticated, but this is a cyber-physical attack. I talked about psychology earlier, your psychology. One of the biggest things you can do in a cyber-physical attack is attack the psychology of the people. If I can get them to panic, or I can cause economic disruption, you have a real serious situation. Again, this is a physical cyber world we're now starting to live in. It's not just how we protect it, but also how we can use those things to kind of cause fear for people. All right, let me talk to you about one more. So when they told us, well, you didn't attack the aircraft, we're like, all right, give us another shot. And this wasn't Delta, but I figured I'm in Atlanta, I'll use Delta. So these are the backseat entertainment systems. And you're in there, you're flying, I don't know, let's do it somewhere nice, Hawaii. And you're gonna watch some movies, right? You're midway through your flight, and you're pushing the screens, and on every seat back, this now appears. Now, does this flight really need to have a bomb on it? No. Do you think the pilot's going to come down under 10,000 feet? At some point, he's going to have to, or she's going to have to, right? This is a cyber-physical attack. We're basically attacking the psychology. We don't have to get that sophisticated. Don't have to blow up the plane, right? At some point, you're going to, the FAA and the pilot and DHS will have to make the call that we got to land it. Let's see what happens. But where? Where do you take it if there really is a bomb? You know, can you lower it and have it explode? I mean, that's a crazy, I would not want to be on the incident response team for this scenario. So then we went back to the three-letter agency and said, here, we attacked your aircraft. And they said, well, that's not really an attack. I mean, you guys just messed with the entertainment system. And what is that agency doing? Rationalizing. Right? They're using their own psychology against them rather than say, okay, we got a problem, this has got to get locked down. Now, this was a test scenario. Interestingly, about a year or two after we did this, somebody actually did get on a flight and demonstrate that you could do this for real. And they say they could get to the flight control systems. I have my suspicion they can't, because those are very separated systems, but you never know. Problems happen, bugs happen, maybe they could. All right. The point of this is really trying to figure out, well, how do you respond to these things? What do you do? How do you kind of frame it so that this isn't occurring to you? You're not rationalizing, you're not getting caught off guard, you're respecting the audacity of the attacker. And so we talked about this, right? But we want to really bring together this operational convergence of the cybersecurity team, the physical security, and your first responders. And we're working with a hospital now where we're actually putting together a scenario which I'll share with you and you can use on your own for your own training, which brings these three groups together. And each one realizes they have a real serious role to play as this cyber-physical stuff comes out. But when we talk about incident response, there's kind of a new way to do it. right? And one of the things when we talk about cyber-physical incident response, and you guys are gonna probably have to deal with this more and more, is rapid response. Most incident response, when it comes to cyber, takes days, right? We do a lot of forensics, we try to figure out what happened. When we introduce the physical element, these are immediate threats, right? They're immediate threats to either the physical landscape, to personnel, to property, whatever it may be. So you need a much more rapid response. So we put together these best practices. First of all, make sure that your incident response program is designed to evolve, right? Make sure that you're not just so set in your ways that you don't do something that takes you forward. We use the concept of protocols. We actually do this with SWAT teams. We talk to them about protocols. And the reason we use protocols, I use the example of, if you look at paramedics in the field, they're able to do a lot. Administer drugs, defibrillate people, do all kinds of stuff without ever talking to the hospital or looking for an escalation of authority. They can react, they can do that. So if paramedics can do that, why can't our physical and cybersecurity teams have protocols that allow them to just go and do what they need to do to protect infrastructure? Now, in the physical world, it's a little more prevalent. On the cyber world, it's not. If you need to take down a stock trading system or a hospital system, in most cases, it requires multiple levels of authority. And it's just because of the way that these organizations are designed. It's not because there's a real reason. So think about what protocols you can put in place. The second thing is immediate action drills, right? This comes from the world of special operations. This is the ability to respond quickly. In most of your cases, either your help desk or your monitoring center are going to be your first line of defense. So figure out what immediate action drills they need. Intelligence, we see very much a lack of intelligence in most organizations, whether it's on the physical or the cyber side. So getting involved in an intelligence program, or at least getting involved with some of the things the government offers for free, and getting those feeds. Now obviously if you're in law enforcement or you're in government, you're gonna have a much richer intelligence, but understanding how to apply that is really critical. You should see immediate value, right? Anything you do should be something that you can measure in months in terms of the effectiveness and the ability to deploy it. If it's gonna take you 2 or 3 years to deploy an incident response program, it's probably way too complicated. Don't make it that difficult. Think about your tools and tactics, and don't just focus on the academics, but think about incident response simulation. I always tell people, if you don't have a real good incident response program, start with a simulation. Figure out where you broke down, go fix that. What are your tipping points? If you have incident response programs in place, then go do some simulations and push them, right? I always find it interesting when people say, let's do pen testing, right? Well, that's great, except when you start talking about the rules of engagement, and people say, well, you can't do this, you can't do that. Okay, well, then are you really gonna get an accurate test if you're putting all these constraints on the testers? Try to be as realistic as you can. So this is a simulation that you guys can take away with you, and you can have these slides, by the way. We can get them through GC&E. But here's the scenario, and you can take this and change it around, but this is a cyber-physical one that helps you kind of think through what you could do, and you can do this as a tabletop or do it for real. So you get an attack against your organization. It's a ransomware attack. And basically, you have to respond then, your security component, your cybersecurity component has to respond to this ransomware attack. The next step is the attacker actually calls you, which is a little bit different than what we normally see in ransomware attacks. Usually it's all just, hey, pay me a ransom, I'll send you the decryption keys. In this scenario, the attacker wants something else. They call you and they tell you you have 30 minutes to pay them $50,000 or else. So now we're introducing a physical component. And more than likely in this stage, I'm hoping you would involve first responders and law enforcement, regardless of what type of organization you have. The third step in this is that the attacker's giving you probably an unreasonable timeline. You're probably not going to get the authority to pay $50,000 in 30 minutes, and that's by design. The attacker knows that. They've ransomwared all your systems, including your phones and everything else in your organization. They've given you an unreasonable demand, and they then come in and an active shooter scenario begins. Right? So this now evolves much, much further than just your typical cyber attack. But you have elements of that on both sides. Now, when we do this with an actual organization, it starts with a bomb threat, and then the bomb actually gets detonated, and it creates a much more challenging scenario. But for you guys, you can do an active shooter, or whatever you want in step 3. The point is, involve a physical component that you have to respond to. Right? As part of the attack, your operating technology is disabled. HVAC systems, access control, and you could say, no, we've got the best in the world. Well, then pretend it got compromised. What do you do? What happens if those things go down? So OT is operating technology, anything that controls your infrastructure. IT is your information technology, just so you have a perspective on those. So you could take the scenario with you. We can do it here if you want, but that's going to be a little hard to do. But you can play with this and customize it and think of different ways to kind of scale it up or scale it down depending on the size of your organization. So we kind of talked about this. It requires cross-functional coordination. The scenario is fast-paced. You got to move. Don't spend a lot of time trying to execute it. Just do it. And you'll need to consider kind of what the impact is to your operating technology and stuff. So we did cover that. All right, questions, thoughts? Somebody had their hand up before. I don't know. Did you have a question or no? So, any questions at all? Really? Wow. Oh, sorry. There's a mic that.
First of all, I wanted to say welcome to Atlanta. I was involved in a project that test drove and tested an autonomous vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
And I had some concerns then about the security of that. Has there ever been a successful cyber attack on an autonomous bus or vehicle? And if so, what kind of safeguards can you put in place for something like that?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, so autonomous vehicles, so for all of you that are wondering what that is any vehicle that does not have a human driver, right? It's running on a program, computer basis. Now, the key thing about those is it doesn't just include cars or buses. It can be anything from a train to a drone to a plane to a boat. It's just vehicle in the broadest sense. So I just did a talk at LA Mobility on autonomous vehicles, and I'm going to be doing a presentation in Germany in a couple months on autonomous vehicle security. And so here's the thing. We haven't seen an attack, as far as we know, and some of this could be classified because it would impact national security, is we haven't seen an attack in a production setting of an autonomous vehicle where somebody took over the car. We have seen it in testing environments. And one of the things that is really concerning, one of the latest series of research in this space, is something called adversarial images. Now what that is when you have a vehicle that is, let's just use a car. When you're training a car to drive by itself, you have to train it to see a stop sign, understand the speed limit sign, kind of do a bunch of stuff. And so that's done through pattern recognition. And you basically keep showing an image of a stop sign over and over and over again, 1 million times to the vehicle, so it recognizes a stop sign, or whatever it is that you're trying to do. Now, adversarial imaging is where we retrain the artificial intelligence. We basically start showing it what looks like a stop sign, but it is slightly not a stop sign. So the vehicle, when it's supposed to stop, will continue. And that has been successfully done, where you basically retrain the artificial intelligence on the vehicle. So that's adversarial imaging. And then there's a variety of other things where we have seen people take over drones and confuse the drone in terms of where it is and what it's doing. So we have seen that, and that would be cyber physical. It's probably one of the scarier ones, right? Car speeds up instead of braking. Some of you have cars right now that will do brake assist or actually stop the car, right? So if you had a successful attack against that, and you're depending on the vehicle, it may not work. And we haven't seen that in production in the world yet. Any other questions? No? All right. Thank you very much.
Stay up here. Thank you, John. Are you going to stick around for lunch? You're going to be hanging out with us for a little bit? Okay, so John will be around during the lunchtime where we'll have some free time for you to visit the exhibitors as well as to visit with our speakers. Dennis Bristol and Jim Mann, thank you for that gift there.
Thank you very much.
And thanks for joining us here in Atlanta. Ladies and gentlemen, before we take a break, I'd like to call up a member of our organization, GC&E, Peggy Rowe. She is the Vice President of IT and Cybersecurity. She wants to share some information with you. Peggy, come on up.
Good morning, everyone. I just wanted to take a moment to invite you to the GC&E booth to see a live demo of our product, Shield IS RTM. It's a network health monitoring tool, And whether you are a security professional wanting to know are your cameras up or down, or you're an IT professional needing the tools and data to troubleshoot what's going on in your network, Shield IS has a solution for you. So anytime, anywhere, are your cameras up, down, what's going on, we have that product. So we'd love to talk to you, and just drop by the GC&E booth and we'll provide a demo for you and some further information. And I hope everyone enjoys their lunch.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Peggy. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's take another break for us to visit with the exhibitors and with each other as well.